Okay, welcome to this video and this demo in which I will start to paint this orc blade model. So in Photoshop I have this set up. I have a few layers. So first of all, of course, are the UVs. Second, I have the aim with occlusion. The black parts are the overlapping parts, so these three parts are where these spikes sit in, and this part is where the hilt sort of overlaps with the blade. And then this bottom part is just neutral gray, just a solid fill color. And then I also have this gradient. So this gradient, let's put it on normal for a sec. So this gradient sort of has white at the top of the blade and this sort of darkest gray here at the bottom of the blade. So if I save it, if I save the texture and go back to max, let's see, I have to show the... Sorry, this creates a gradient over the whole weapon. And if you watch theory class, then you know that we sort of want to lead the eye, and in most cases we do that by lighter colors, but also a bit more contrast and a bit more saturation, but generally with a value. So this is a pretty old trick which is used a lot in game graphics, also on characters. So characters have their face at the top, and then that's the most important bit, and then their sort of their torso, their shoulders are second most important, and sort of like it gets less and less important until you get to their bottom of their feet. So on characters you also see this technique quite often. Now this weapon of course is pretty simple, and you wouldn't really need this gradient since you can kind of see it in UVs where the parts are and sort of where they are I mean they're like ordered pretty okay. But if you have a more complex weapon with lots of pieces and they're like the UVs are like puzzled together in a more complex way, it might be very useful to render it out in max. And I'm going to show you how. It's not very complex. So I'm going to on a copy here, show it on a copy. So let's say this like you don't have this gradient yet, you have to render it out. Well, okay, let me select it. So we're gonna make or put a UV map on there. So not an unwrap UVW, but UV map. And by default this is planar, and as you can see it sort of creates a texture from the side. I think if you choose box, that should also work. No, stick to planar. And then I will create a material for this. Well, no, first. So we have it unwrapped, of course. It's already unwrapped. The unwrapped is in the edit poly. So then a UV map, and of course I'm gonna set this to channel 2, and then I'm going to we're gonna set or get a gradient here in the diffuse. So this spawns on my other window, so a gradient here. And for this gradient I'm also going to choose channel 2. Let's put it on here. Let's make it visible. Alright, so here we have the gradient. It's now upside down, so let's choose white at the top. And then for the bottom I didn't go for full black, since if you're like in Photoshop and maybe you multiply it, so I sort of went for darker gray, something a bit like that. Okay, so now we have the gradient on top here. So how do we get the this gradient onto our normal UVs so we can see it in Photoshop like I just did? Well, we simply do that by rendering to texture. Well, select it, rendering, render to texture, and here, so we have the work blade. So we want to add some more padding, 16, something like that, and then use existing channel 1, so it will bake onto this channel, right? And then add something here, and since we put the gradient in the diffuse, I'm also going to do that, or I'm going to render out the diffuse. Alright, let's choose a decent name and location. So that's yeah, maybe bleed. Alright, and the size same as the texture. Yeah, okay. So this here is not the texture that we just generated. This is simply sort of what Max sees in the viewport, right? So you see the shadow of the viewport default lighting. So just ignore this and close it. But then here I have, oops, sorry. This is the result, right? And you see some padding here. So here you have the gradient. So if you have a very complex weapon, this is a very useful way to do it. Or if you have a character, then you can also combine this then with ambient occlusion and so on. Alright, so that is what we have in Photoshop. Now, let's get started. Without these two layers, we'll use them at the end to sort of either guide us, or yeah, we'll blend them in, but we want to paint, right? So for painting, I'm just going to use a normal layer and a normal hard brush with pressure setting setting to opacity, and at the start, yeah, and also put a slightly darkish gray underneath, right? So something like this, and I'm gonna start with the main blade. I'm not sure if we still do the hilt or not, but I'll show you yeah, in some finished examples what I did with this. Oops, sorry. Cancel, no, what? Okay, so first I'll call this planning. Alright, so first we want to plan how to bring out the shape as best as possible. So I want to decide on a light direction. Now in this case, I sort of yeah, how should I put? I unwrapped everything sort of straight, right? So everything is sort of in the correct rotation. But if you have again a more complex weapon with rotated clusters or something, maybe it's useful if you bake like a bit of light or something if it gets too complex. But for this, I don't think it's necessary. And yeah, but if you model it and unwrap it yourself, you should be able to know where everything is. So first of all, I want to have, of course, that gradient over the blade towards the top, and yeah, towards the sort of the pointy end. But of course, we also have, let's say, this sharp edge, then the sharp edge at the top, and then mostly the flat part here in the middle, and of course we still have a back and like a bottom side and so on. But so light direction, I'm gonna come from the top, but not straight down, but slightly slightly from the front. So light is coming in this direction. So that means which parts of the model are mostly pointed towards that direction. Well, that's this part here. So this part will receive most highlight, and then sort of as these turn away, these sections turn away from that light source, these will become a little bit darker, right? And also this will entirely be a pretty light surface. Now this surface curves, so that means that this section here is actually more turns towards the light than this section. So this will be a bit darker, this will be a bit lighter, and then there will be a gradient like this. And the side is basically flat, but of course we want to have like a small gradient or a subtle gradient, not too strong over the blade, but I also want to like accentuate the edges here, right? So I want to make those extra visible, and so this edge here and these edges, I want to make those extra visible, and I'm sort of going to blend towards those edges a bit. So this will also make like a bit of a gradient towards these edges. Okay, and also on these surfaces. So I'll make the sort of cutting edge slightly darker and then sort of blend towards those edges. Okay, so that's a bit of planning you have to do, sort of for every shape. You wanna make these shapes as readable as possible. That's the idea. All right, and for that I'm basically going to just blend. Keep blending gray tones into this to sort of get this shape. I'm at this point not really super concerned what material this is. I'll make this some sort of metal, but even if it would be some sort of crystal or some more special fantasy material, these sort of rules still apply to everything. Okay, so with a sort of large brush, I'm gonna slowly get that gradient in there. So this is sort of the soft gradient. And then sort of blend that in. Obviously you don't want your brush to be too small, otherwise it'll sort of become too smudgy. And then slightly darker in this part. Okay, so I'm gonna turn off my wires for a second and already check this in 3D. Let's see. So it's this. Do we still need this? No, I can delete this. We'll turn off the wireframe, right, to see if we sort of see it. And I've set this to flat color, right? So no default shading here. this sort of helps, and maybe it's possible that in the game engine, yeah, you have shading as well, but you want to sort of see if the texture carries itself, right? Without shading from anything, if the texture carries itself. So as you can see, the edges aren't really that visible, so we'll continue working on that. Of course, it's gonna take more than 2 minutes. Right, blend them in a bit. Okay, right. So yeah, it's like I want to blend this in even more, but as you can see, it sort of helps to sort of separate the different surfaces of the shape a little bit, and to accentuate those edges. But now, like, it still looks like a line with a Photoshop brush, so it needs to be blended in better, of course. I mean, it is a line with a Photoshop brush. But yeah, now we sort of make this blend, yeah, better and better, smoother and smoother. So this is like the crucial step in this, yeah, in this sort of texturing. When you get this step right, you can pour any sort of details and colors and those kind of things later on, and it should still be a pretty strong, yeah, a pretty strong end result. However, if you sort of think this is not important, I want to jump into the details as quickly as possible, or I want to do this fancy material, you run into the danger of having a texture which doesn't sort of fulfill its most important purpose, and doesn't make the object more readable, but as just a bit of a mess of details. Let me put it that way. Okay, so as and since now I have this, I can sort of turn off or leave the wires off for a bit here. And also, as you can see, I'm now, so this is a 1K texture, and I'm not zoomed in more than that. So if you zoom in just on a part, you lose like you lose vision of where you have to go. Sorry, I'm not sure if the video takes up the sound from the computer, but that was a bit loud. Okay. So yeah, take your time if you can. Get some music. This I think it's one of the most relaxing and one of the most fun things you can do in all the yeah, in all the disciplines of game design. Sort of hand painted texturing, just with just Photoshop, like no nothing complex, nothing special. All right, let's see. Okay, so at the bottom of the blade. Sorry, so a question from Brian. Is it okay if I work on a 2K texture and compress afterwards? Yes, you can always do that. Yes, if you prefer working on a larger canvas, yes, definitely. Is painting with a soft brush not done? In short, no, use a hard brush. A little bit longer, it depends. You will sort of see me use soft brushes when I want like really soft gradients, but for this, if you, yeah, like it will look sort of different. I suggest that you definitely at the start just use a hard brush just with opacity. So sometimes, yeah, at the end, sort of when I make these really big smooth gradients, I will use a hard brush. Sorry, a soft brush, I mean. And also, like in a hard brush, you can sort of already put a little bit of structure. What is? Okay. So I was going to look at the ambient occlusion and actually see the overlapping parts. So there's next to the overlapping parts, there's just a bit of ambient occlusion from the map itself. So here, but I want to really exaggerate that a lot. So I'm going to do that with a darker color to sort of work towards these edges. And of course, our primary surface, not surface, our primary purpose is to make the shape as readable as possible, so that sort of exaggerated ambient occlusion helps with that, right? So here, this overlapping bit, and I think maybe a bit of an edge at the back is okay, especially at the top here. Just subtly. Okay. Let's have a look at this again in 3D. If you have two monitors, then of course you can sort of watch both. And again, like I said in theory, the test here is to zoom out. So either you actually zoom out, or something else that you can do is to actually make a scaled down version, so you instantly see it smaller on your screen as well. So it should still be nice and readable here. So this is not a bad, like it's not a bad start. Of course, we still need the other parts, and then depending on which material it will be, you'll sort of go different directions. yeah, you want to have some surface detail and so on. But first do those sort of gradients to just bring out the shape. So I'm also going to do these spikes. So on these spikes, yeah, let's bring out the planning again. Right, so on the spikes, of course, I want to see a difference between this surface and this surface. I also want to have a gradient that sort of goes along with the shape itself, so that becomes lighter as the shape, yeah, as a spike gets sharper. Yeah, and then also the two gradients, and yeah, start with sort of, since that's a contact area, start with like a dark area there. All right. So, and also bring out the, of course, the edges on the spikes themselves. So I'll actually do those first and then blend those in. That's a bit too much. All right, let's see. A bit darker here, but mostly at the bottom. So yeah, still pretty smudgy. So Brian has another question. If we have loose elements sticking out, you recommend we make the surrounding a bit darker to blend them better? Well, I'm doing this in this case for extra readability. So as this shape sort of, as these two shapes sort of have an edge, yeah, have an edge here that's not sticking out. So the edges that are the edges that are like sticking out here are lighter, but I also want, the edges that are, the sort of creases to be darker, right? So I want that both. So again, if you look at this blade here, the very small version, see, it helps to it helps to to bring out the shapes of these spikes, of course. All right. So at this point, I think it kind of depends where you want to go with this, which sort of metal it should be, or if it I used a regular hard brush. Yes, for the I use the same brush all the time. That's why you can still, if you look closely here, you can still see some areas, but we'll keep blending this. But now it kind of depends on the type of metal you want, and looking at reference there, I think helps, since we're working within a style. I think it helps to have some reference, and you might also at this point sort of check your values, your light values. So I'm gonna put levels on top of this, and here I can sort of check if maybe, like, it's pretty spread out, so that is generally a good sign. But yeah, maybe this can use a bit more punch. So I'm going to drag this in and maybe a bit more contrast, like this. Yeah, kind of depends. But if you look at this, so like I said, go too far, like add too much contrast. But if you look at this, if we save this, yeah, it actually doesn't look that bad on here. And then if you go back, see, well, it's not too bad, but I do think it could have used, or the whole thing can use a bit of contrast. So that's also a good moment for this. Maybe it's just a bit over the top, but still. You could, of course, also sort of make it entirely darker again and sort of blend a second layer or second level of lightness on top again. Alright, let's see. Let me get some reference. I think I had some. Just a second. Here, something that Luna showed. Let me put it on the screen. Alright, so here, so this piece of metal that's on this weapon, there's a few, there's a few characteristics. So first of all, yeah, there's damage, so some big pieces, some big chunks, but also the sort of the edge used here is quite in one way has quite a bit of contrast with the surface, and is also not perfectly smooth, right? So I want to sort of for this recreate this a bit. There's also a bit of a green, or is it maybe just in a general environment, a bit of green color in there. So some color variation is also something which is a good idea on metals. And of course, if you have like some sort of crystal or I don't know which demonic material, that can also have colors in it. All right, so I'm gonna work towards this now. And for that, I think it might help actually if we make it a bit dark, yeah, a bit darker like this, and then next layer here. So. So this line shouldn't be perfect to sort of hint that these shapes aren't perfectly smooth as well, right? So in 3D, of course, it's quite perfectly smooth, but that actually in the weapon, it's not perfectly smooth. So that sort of structure, but that all depends on the subject, of course. Maybe it's too light. And then there might be some, a bit of sort of like not damage, but just like different. Like the weapon is not like this part, for example, that is not perfectly straight. That there's a bit of dents and a bit of like waviness inside of this this surface. So I can I'm just gonna do this on top of everything. So let's say I have like a darker area here, or I have like maybe a bit of a darker area here, and then a lighter. So sort of break it up, but be careful not to break up the shape too much, of course. But so, oops, that was a bit too hard. And then, so around this this darker area, I can sort of with a bit of highlight, sort of suggest that this is like a bit of a that has its own wavy like there's a bit of mountains and creases and so on, just on that surface. Yeah, don't make it too oops, don't make it too smudgy. Careful. And again, let's have a look. So do this, but make sure you don't lose the original value, the original strength of the Okay, let's have another look. Let's see in chat. Okay, and then big chunks of damage as well, so we need that too. And I suggest you do them on a new layer. And in this weapon, there's two sort of chips out of the blade, like big ones, but we want some extra minor ones as well. So basically, with a no, that's too dark. With a darker color, since it's a surface that's lower, you want to do this. But you within this damaged piece, you also want like a light side and a dark side, right? So the piece sort of goes like this in the surface. So if the light comes here, one side is lighter, the other side is darker. So and as it gets sort of deeper and deeper, so right in the pit it's the most darkest, and then here the metal should sort of be pushed to the side a bit, so you can have a bit of a highlight on the sides, right? So I'm going to actually sort of emulate this, right? So this is like a lighter side, and then even a bit of a highlight here on these parts. And in this part, so it can also sort of extend further if necessary. This bit just adds like a adds the damage in the silhouette of the blade as well, but it can sort of extend a bit here if that's fine. All right. Okay. Let's have a look here. Right, so that looks okay, and it sort of course disappears if it's too small, but the big surfaces stay. And then yeah, extra detail now, extra bits of damage, extra dents, and basically it's gonna be this, yeah, always the same thing. So you want to start with like a bit of a darker area, right, where you got the yeah, the surface sort of makes this movement, but you also want to sort of shade this a bit as well, right? So and then the highlights sort of messed up a bit here. Sort of surrounding. Oops, that's too. Right, so that you're actually just painting in the relief of this damage. Small bits, a bit darker. So this is also an edge, of course, that can be damaged. And then some more minor bits and chips out of the blade. Let's have another look at the reference here. Yeah, so like not too small, but a few. Yeah, let's do one more here, small one like that. Okay, then let's blend them in. Here, yeah, sort of use this. Bit like that. To accentuate that edge. Okay. Yeah, and so if it's on a different layer, you don't have to worry too much about it. You can sort of, yeah, don't worry about messing it up, or maybe adding too much. Yeah, let's blend this in a bit more, that we really get the sense of 3D depth here on the surface. And so on, and so on, and so on, of course. So Now it's like a bit, yeah, you have like damage, 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 damage. Like you have some major pieces of damage, and then for the rest the blade isn't that damaged at all. So maybe, well, it's not so bad, but maybe like some minor damage, or maybe we sort of make some of these a bit softer or smaller. Let's see, like this one. I think that's possible if you select it to actually just, yeah, I think that will work. Yeah, like that. All right, and maybe some more minor bits of a yeah, irregularities. Right, to bring out yeah, the character of this metal. All right, so you can continue this quite a long time and sort of yeah, blend in and maybe, yeah, like tone down things again, and sort of, yeah, you like take your time for this process. But I'm gonna sort of wrap it up here. Next thing is, of course, also that color variation. So color variation, personally, I like to do that with a color layer. And so let's add a little bit of yeah, green turquoise tone to sort of the highlights. But I also want to have like then the complementary red as a bit of rust in the shadows. I know this reference specifically here doesn't really have it. It's just darker, but you can, yeah, you could, yeah, you could add it. Actually, a few things that I liked here was that they had a few of those extra bits of reflectiveness. Sort of indicate some minor irregularities. Yeah, see some of that small detail. All right, so color. So a layer set to color variation. It doesn't have to be too colorful. So as it gets brighter, and don't worry too much about like sort of overdo it again. Sort of go too far. Take a step back, right? Maybe it even gets a bit bluish towards the highlights instead of greenish, and then, yeah, a bit more red, sort of in these dark areas to indicate maybe bits of rust and so on. So maybe, or this is definitely too much, and it should be. That's the point. But I still want to see it, sort of get used to it, and see, yeah, okay, it's too much. But then in Photoshop, of course, we can sort of tone this down to sort of the level where we need to be, right? Yeah, something like this, and maybe even in the next layer a bit of like rust, which is actually on a normal. This is a soft normal layer. So just like we had also some like minor parts and like pieces of dirt perhaps, right? So that structure that this orc blade has, sort of want to get that in there. Yeah. Oops. Okay. All right. Next step, I think, is to sort of keep blending it. But I don't want to like just spend too long on it as a demo. Yeah. So eventually you might sort of, right, so keep blending it, blend it up, make it better, polish. But basically it's same thing as we've done now, but just more of it. You sort of gonna want to adjust these things. So one way to adjust them, which I found quite useful if you do it at the end. Let's say you want some of the parts to be lighter, but others, yeah, like some of the parts are lighter. So one thing you can do, one trick, is that you, let's do it without the image occlusion, is that you use use the Alt Control Shift E shortcut to create a layer that has everything that's underneath here, and to then use a destructive levels, so that's Control L, to adjust this layer. So let's say, so I wanted stuff to be, let's say I want some stuff darker. Let's I don't want it lighter. Let's say I want some parts here here darker. So I can do yeah, something like this. Okay, but not everywhere. So what I can do then here on this layer is add a mask, make that mask black. So right, so it's no longer visible. And then in this case I can use a soft round brush, big one, and sort of say, okay, here I want this area darker, right? So then you see this part sort of keeps the same the same texture, and it blends perfectly. But yeah. Okay, so those sort of adjustments can be very useful, especially if you spend a long time like texturing all these details and so on, and it becomes hard to sort of make an entire part which is already detailed darker or lighter. Okay, so aimed occlusion. So this gradient, how can you use this gradient? Well, you can either use it as a guide and just sort of, yeah, paint according to these values, or maybe we can set it to like an overlay. It's gonna be like way too hard, like it makes this entire part super light. But if we tone it down, then maybe it does work. Right, so now there's again like a stronger gradient over the whole weapon, which I do think helps with the contrast. Like, you could have a weapon where the focal point is not at the top, is not at towards the pointy end. Like maybe it's not, yeah, like it's not a blade, it's something else. So maybe then it doesn't work, but for most things that gradient works. Or something else that is possible. Maybe if you work pretty light, you can sort of put it on multiply a bit and sort of tone down the sort of handle and so on. That's also possible. Like, it kind of depends what you want to do. Okay, but I'm going to. I think this sort of shows the process. I want to show some other results here. So I made this texture already a few times in the past, and I want to show some other results as well. Right, so here the idea was that it sort of has this, yeah, these different surfaces, and here the handle is also made, and then the wrapping. So with the wrapping, it's important to yeah, to give it some thickness, and then also to sort of blend it in with the other pieces and so on. And here, yeah, you see these yeah, red purpley areas, and then here's almost a green, blues, and yellow. Like, it has quite a bit of color richness, I think, and works quite well. And then I also have no, that's an example. I have this blade, right? So which you've seen in theory classes, where I found some reference where the blade is really like really broken up, some sort of broken up material. It almost, yeah, looks like a very special. Yeah, maybe it's almost made out of some sort of stone or something. And then here as well, in this handle, like this was the one I spent the most time on. Here, yeah, like the handle is still super smooth and so on. It's the basic shape, but nothing more. Like here, oops, this one, it has these small bits of detail. But I want to show you something. So I want to show this one here. That's without the gradient. And to make it easier, well, let's save this first. And I was isolated. If I end isolation mode, oops. Right, so this is the, let's remove it. So this is the blade without the gradient, right? Now all the parts in themselves are looking okay, but it doesn't really have like a strong sort of the direction in here, which I still want to add. So I can do that with a gradient, and I can show you if I make it entirely yeah, desaturated. If it's just grayscale, then you see that the values here, or yeah, the sort of strongest there, but it's sort of spread out. And then on this version here, I added this gradient on top of everything. So this area at the bottom here is a bit darker, and it gets lighter towards the top. So if you compare these two, I do think like this one sells better. And of course, it's a trick that Blizzard uses. It's a trick that is used in Dota and in so many other games, right? So this general gradient, subtle, right? So like all the detail in the dark areas can still be seen, but the subtle general gradient on top of the whole shape works quite well to lead the eye. Okay. So going to turn on. So this is the difference. So it's not oh yeah, it's not a super big difference, I think, in values, but it does bring out the, yeah, it does sort of bring that gradient in there, and almost, yeah, it's like hard to notice, like for a player or a viewer, but the direction is in this. Okay. I think unless there are more questions, I can wrap this up. And yeah, of course, I think there's plenty of other videos and guides and so on this hand painted texturing style. And if they're good ones, they should also stress, yeah, to make it readable, to work on the big shapes, to sort of leave the details till last, and those kind of things, to bring like the color variation. Like on this blade, if you look at it for a while, or this one too, it has like tons of blue in it and red, and here like all these different hues and so on. But it still looks pretty, yeah, cool and convincing, like just a metal, right? So that color richness is definitely one of the things that when you're doing hand painted texturing you wanna embrace. Okay, so I see no more questions. So that means, yeah, I wish you all a lot of fun texturing, and yeah, hopefully I'm curious to see all the results of this year again as well. All right, tips for crystal. Yes, Luca, I will actually talk about it in theory class tomorrow. Okay, but yeah, reference is a good start. All right, yeah, thank you for watching and enjoy texturing.